Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1989 drama In Country. Now, In Country is a film directed by Norman Jewison, and I think, for the most part, he did a really good job directing this film, especially when it comes to the kind of movie that it is. This is not a film that's full of a lot of pomp, flash, or circumstance when it comes to the visuals. It's a very down-home, very realistic, very simple, straightforward kind of movie. So it makes sense that the direction doesn't really have a lot of moments where it's being flashy. There are some scenes, though, where the direction shines in that capacity, mainly when it comes to a lot of sequences that involve any kind of motion, whether it's an egret flying through the air in a scene or two, Emily Lloyd running from place to place, or a lot of the flashbacks that take place in Vietnam. That's when the direction shines in that capacity, when it comes to a little bit more flashy visuals. One scene in particular really stands out to me. It's a scene during a storm, just the way the storm was shot with the lightning flashing, as well as the way that the PTSD flashback that Bruce Willis's character Emmett has during that scene. I thought that was really strong and genuinely surreal and nightmarish, and had some really effective visuals because the flashbacks were shot in a way where it was very unorthodox and very jarring, and it really did put you in the shoes of Emmett in a very effective way. The flashbacks had this stretched out, distorted view to them. It's almost like they were shot with a fisheye lens, and they might have been shot with a fisheye lens, but it was definitely some different kind of technique or a different scope that was used for those scenes in particular. And I felt that Jewison really allowed his performers to shine. He didn't get in the way of the film's really strong emotional core, which is the performances of the film's main cast members. So there's a lot of scenes that are very grounded and really center around one or two actors in a scene. So I think that the direction wasn't a distraction, which some other directors might ultimately do something like that. They just are so preoccupied and focused on, look at me, I'm a director, that they take away from the strength of the performers. And I definitely don't think that was the case here within Country. The screenplay is by Frank Pearson and Cynthia Sidray, and it's based on a book of the same name by Bobby Ann Mason. I've never read the book. I think it's like a collection of memoirs or something like that. So I don't really know whether or not this was 100% accurate to the source. But the screenplay, for what it is, it works. I feel the focus should have been centered around a different character, though. As interesting and as strong as the plot involving Samantha is, it's not as intriguing or as captivating as the subplot with Emmett. So I think that the roles should have been switched around. I think the focus should have been on Emmett Smith and centered on his issues with post-traumatic stress disorder, his issues with connecting with Samantha, his issues with his health, and so on, the relationships with him and his Vietnam War friends, as well as maybe a bit of romance that you could build up between him and this character that is revealed to have a genuine crush on him, or had dated him at one point in her life, but things just didn't work out. So I think that you could have focused a little bit more on that instead of the other subplots that occur with Samantha and her journey. Because the most intriguing aspects of Samantha's journey in the script involve her discovering the past, discovering what happened to her father in Vietnam, or really just getting a bigger glimpse of who he was. And doing that by reading diaries and so on. And in turn also building a stronger connection with Emmett. And the connection was already strong between the two, but she kept trying to get him to tell her more about Vietnam. And through the process of reading the diaries from her father and seeing what he had to do in Vietnam and what it ultimately it did to him mentally, she, due to her own issues, due to the fact that she doesn't really know a lot and she doesn't know as much as she thinks, and her own naive nature, she assumes that he was a bad guy. I don't like him anymore because of what she discovered, and that leads to a really strong and gripping scene where Emmett just forces her to hear the truth from someone who went to Vietnam, who was a part of the Vietnam War, and did come home. And she's reluctant to hear it, but then he finally just puts his foot down and is like, no, you're going to hear it. Because how dare you say that you don't like him anymore? That's cheap. That's just, you don't understand. And you've been asking me and pestering me, and you want to understand, you want to know. Well, I'm going to tell you. And that was a really well-written scene. And that's where the strength of this film lies when it comes to the narrative, is these scenes that involve these two characters. Which is why I feel that really should have been an even more central focus when it comes to the movie. For the most part, it is a central focus with the film, but there's a lot of other stuff that goes on with the plot that's just not nearly as captivating. The stuff involving Samantha and her best friend, and her friend gets pregnant, and they're dealing with some teen pregnancy kind of drama. It's been there, done that. Felt like almost the setup for an after-school special. Nothing really that unique. The stuff involving her and her mother and their relationship just didn't really do anything for me. The stuff involving Samantha and her boyfriend, that was a dead end. So the more interesting stuff was really between her and Emmett. And there was another little bit too where she developed a bit of a infatuation with another vet who was a friend of Emmett's, and she actually spent the night with him and they made love, but then he broke it off because it just was not something that he felt was right for him to do, to be with this 17-year-old girl. He's this older guy, and it just isn't going to work out. So that was interesting, mainly because of the way that the other vet was written, because there were some moments where the character was really able to showcase more depth. But that's pretty much dropped after that night, after he sells her a car, and then that's really about it. There was this other bit with this guy who set up a party for Vietnam vets, and it seems like he's very passionate about the cause, and he was upset that barely anyone showed up to the party to support the vets. And that's something that just isn't really touched upon that much. So I agree with other critics at the time that said it really didn't always focus on things that were the most compelling when it comes to the narrative. But that doesn't mean that the film doesn't have its merits when it comes to the narrative, because the compelling scenes are very effective and very strong. The finale that takes place at the Vietnam Memorial, that is some really powerful, emotional, and touching stuff. So this is a movie that definitely had the right idea narrative wise. I think it does a good job really creating this small town landscape in Kentucky and really making it feel like it's a genuine slice of American life, warts and all. So I do really appreciate that as well. And there are two characters here that are very strong, and you really do like being around them, even despite their flaws. Samantha is a very precocious, spunky kid, but she's also very naive. And at times that can be a little frustrating. But she can also be very poignant and have a lot of really genuinely worthwhile things to say. For instance, there's a line that Samantha says that I want to quote here because I just thought it was so great and so relevant to today. Not only was it relevant back in 1989 due to the rise in films or other bits of media about Vietnam vets, but it was also very relevant when it comes to what it's trying to say now, currently. Don't you ever feel like the whole world is falling to pieces and everybody is just paying attention to their little piece and no one is doing anything about what's really wrong? Like, you could apply that to today and it still rings true. So there are moments like that in this script that really do speak to you and really do stick with you in that regard. So the script at times can be a bit of a mixed bag. Some characters are stronger than others. Some subplots or some overall plots are stronger than others. But at the end of the day, it was still a decent enough screenplay. There was enough going on that I cared, and I wanted to see what happened next. I wanted to see how this story ended. I wanted to see whether or not Samantha was going to find the right path in her life, make the right choices. I wanted to see the connection build even more between her and Emmett, her uncle. I wanted to see her have some bit of catharsis when it comes to what happened to her father in Vietnam. The film also features some really powerful, strong, and genuinely excellent performances by the two main performers. Bruce Willis delivers one of his best acting roles and performances of his career as Emmett Smith. It's just a really gripping, raw, emotional powder keg of a performance that culminates in a really spectacular scene when it comes to the acting from Bruce Willis when he breaks down and finally faces the past. He faces the ghosts of the past when it comes to his time in Vietnam, and he has a moment of really clear vulnerability that he shares with Emily Lloyd. And the scene at the Vietnam War Memorial. The way that he handled that was also really good. So it was just a really strong performance, and I wish that you saw more of it because it was so good. That's why I wish that Bruce Willis's character Emmett was the central focus of the film instead of Emily Lloyd as Samantha. But Emily Lloyd is no slouch. She was excellent too. I thought she was amazing as Samantha. Very gregarious gal. Definitely brought the character to life in a way that was very indelible. You immediately liked her. You wanted her to get out of the dead end town and find the courage to go outside of her comfort zone, and you wanted her to find out what happened to her father. And she even nailed the accent. It came across as very authentic, and all in all, it was a really good performance. And it's a damn shame that she had her career altered dramatically due to mental illness. And I wish her the best, and I hope that she's in a better place right now. Joan Allen, she's fine here as Samantha's mom, but I didn't really care for the stuff with the mother, so it just didn't really do that much for me. Kevin Anderson, I thought was pretty lame as Lonnie. I don't think he did that great of a job. I thought the performance was pretty lackluster. As it was just one of those things where I just didn't buy it. It just wasn't very authentic compared to the other performers. Peggy Ray, I thought she was probably the other standout of the main cast as Samantha's grandmother and the father of the soldier that died, who passed away in Vietnam before Samantha was born. John Terry's another one I want to mention, who played Tom, a war buddy of Emmett's, who has a brief relationship with Samantha. Judith Ivey was a lot of fun with her little role as Anita. Honestly, she's another performer and another character I wish had more screen time. That's the character I'm talking about, who was infatuated with or had a crush on Emmett and had a scene at the party where she danced with Emmett. And I think they really should have expanded upon that more, because the Judith Ivey and Bruce Willis had some really good chemistry. Stephen Tobolowsky, he's in this in a very different kind of role for him. It's a much more masculine, machismo fueled kind of character, very different to the kind of nerdy guys that he would play throughout most of his career. So it was refreshing to see him play against type. Jim Beaver, a real life Vietnam vet, he also has a really good scene as Earl. He really made the best of the few scenes that he had as well. Daniel Jenkins, he played Dwayne. I believe that was the guy who was Samantha's father. I also thought that he had a really good performance. And Heidi Swedberg, she's fine too as Dawn, Samantha's friend. I just didn't really care for the subplot involving her and her pregnancy. It really didn't do anything for me. But the performance was not bad at all. And it was really a lot of fun to see Heidi Swedberg in a early role, because this is an actress who would go on to be known for her role as George's girlfriend in Seinfeld. She's the one that ultimately became a lesbian because of George. So it was nice to see her in a completely different kind of role. One other actress I want to mention real quick is Patricia Richardson, the wife of Tim Allen's character in Home Improvement. She was in this in a very early role as another wife, but this time around she was the wife of Stephen Tobolowsky's character. So, yeah, it was a solid enough cast. Solid cast for a solid film. The film also featured some, I'm not going to say necessarily superlative or really particularly notable technical elements, but it's still a film that does feature some good cinematography for what the film's trying to do. The editing by Anthony Gibbs and Lou Lombardo, I think, also works within the parameters that the film is trying to follow. The editing is very workmanlike, but it fits for a film that really has this kind of workmanlike approach. I will say this, though. I think the editing when it comes to the Vietnam flashbacks and the PTSD moments and the Vietnam War memorial finale and the storm sequence, I really felt that the editing really was quite excellent in those sequences. The score is by James Horner, and it definitely has a lot of emotion to it. It's a very moving score, but since it's James Horner, he does copy a lot of his same notes, so it kind of sounds a little too familiar to some of his other work. So that's kind of a knock that I do have against the score, but it's not a bad score. It's just one of those things where it does sound a little bit too similar, and he doesn't really provide a lot of unique notes when it comes to the score compared to even some of his other work. So I wouldn't say it's one of his best scores by any means, because it really did seem like there was a lot of copying and pasting here. In particular, a lot of stuff from Uncommon Valor, as well as other films. But speaking of music, I want to mention the soundtrack. So, for the most part, the original songs or the songs that are used in this film, they're not anything that's really going to stand out, except for one really clear exception, and that is the Bruce Springsteen song "I'm on Fire." I thought the use of that song was perfect. I thought it was really fantastic, especially the way that it was edited and cut into the scenes that featured Emily Lloyd's character Samantha running from place to place. And I thought it actually was a good central theme for her character overall. So, yeah, that was a really inspired song choice, and it worked really well in the film. The movie has like a running time of 128 minutes, but it doesn't really feel like it drags too much. Because like I said, there's enough there to keep you going. There's enough going on with the plot and with these characters that you want to keep watching. And I can see why some people weren't that impressed with it at the time. I can see why some people aren't impressed with it now. But it's still a film that has some very effective, powerful, raw moments of emotion, dealing with the aftermath of war from different perspectives. And when something moves you the way that this film moved me, and it moves you to genuine tears, then it definitely did something right. So I think that this is a respectful film when it comes to dealing with the traumas of Vietnam vets. I don't think it's too cloying. I know some people have said that it's a little too sentimental, or it comes across like a soap opera. I don't really interpret it that way, and it feels genuine to me. And I think that it does a good job really hammering home this point that a lot of these men were forgotten and are still forgotten. The opening scene in particular is a really great, powerful moment because it juxtaposes scenes of these soldiers who were getting ready to go to Vietnam. This is their first drop, and their superiors, or I think maybe the voice of the president or someone really high up there, is saying all of these great and wonderful things to them. You are great Americans. You will never be forgotten. Basically pumping these young men and sometimes women up, and then they drop them in Vietnam, and they are essentially dropped into a hellhole. And then when they come back to America, all of the stuff that they were being told did not turn out to be reality. A lot of these men were forgotten. The war itself has pretty much been forgotten, except for when they talk about it in the context of, well, it's the war we didn't win, or it's the war that was just a waste. And it really is too bad. I mean, yes, there were a lot of atrocities that were committed in the Vietnam War, but the way that people just put a giant label on all soldiers who came back from war and just called them all, and just started calling all of these soldiers baby killers and all of this other shit, was just fucked up. And it just had to be such a shock to the system for these soldiers who already went through hell to come back to the country that they love and the country that they fought so hard for, and wound up losing a lot of things in the process. Not just friends, not just, in some instances, their sanity or limbs, but they come back and they lost that. They lost that faith that they thought that the American public had in them. So it's one of those things where that just had to be incredibly rough. And I think the way that the film opened up with all these notions of grandeur, and then just bringing it to a crashing halt, I thought that was a really powerful and strong way to open the film. And it was honestly kind of ballsy, especially for a film that's dealing with Vietnam vets, to have a scene like that. That's like, that was all a bunch of bullshit, wasn't it? And I think that actually spoke to a lot of vets. They were public, yeah, it was a bunch of horseshit. And then for some vets, it might not have rang as true. But that's the kind of stuff that I think really does make this film something that should be more well regarded, or a film within this subgenre of drama that should be discussed more often. So anyway, I really don't know what else to say about In Country, except thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.